Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert have been disappointing fantasy quarterbacks for a couple of years, but they could bounce back big time in 2025. We discuss why and talk through other quarterback and tight end bounce back candidates on today's episode of Locked On Fantasy Football.
You are Locked On Fantasy, your daily NFL fantasy podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Michelle Magdziuk, and when I'm not doing this, I'm a researcher and fantasy analyst with NFL Network.
And I'm your other co-host, Vinnie Iyer. When I'm not doing this, I'm worried about NFL fantasy and betting for sportingnews.com.
Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Today, we are going to discuss quarterbacks and tight ends that disappointed in 2024. But they have, we're expecting maybe that they can bounce back in 2025. So we're going to talk through some candidates. We're going to give you our reasons why they could bounce back, maybe why they won't bounce back, and then kind of just give you our consensus opinion on them for 2025. So let's start with the two big names, because Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert, two of the best quarterbacks in the NFL, right? But not for fantasy. So Mahomes has now had two straight down years, quarterback 11 in points per game in 2024, quarterback 14 in points per game in 2023. Herbert has actually had three straight pretty disappointing years after being the quarterback 2 in 2021. So who do you feel better about in 2025? Because I will say with Justin Herbert, he did start to come through in the second half of the season. His points per game shot up from weeks 8 through 18, averaging nearly 20 points per game. So was that just him getting used to Jim Harbaugh and that you feel better about him having a big, huge comeback in 2025? Or will Mahomes finally get all like a good set of weapons and become, a big passer and them leaning on him more in the offense?
Yeah, I think Mahomes, kind of where we projected him, finished in the right spot, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we thought he was not going to finish in the top 12 because of the issues with the weapons and trying to figure things out. And then you had the Rashee Rice injury that threw things off, that added to the issue there. And then we knew it was going to be a grind for another season here, trying to get through that offense. Now, Justin Herbert actually finished, I think, ahead of our expectations. We thought he was going to finish lower. He was an afterthought in a lot of leagues. He crept into the mid-tier and even the top tier of QB2s at the end of last season. And Michelle was right. I mean, a lot of it had to do with Ladd McConkey coming on, Quentin Johnson scoring all those touchdowns, different players stepping up for that Chargers passing game. They opened up the passing game a little bit, tied to when J.K. Dobbins was not available and they couldn't run the ball, right? So they had to move the ball somehow with Jim Harbaugh. I think they'll have a little bit more confidence. I think they could use some more weapons, namely a tight end. I mean, Will Dissly was not reliable or consistent here. And maybe another receiver in the mix as well. I mean, Josh Palmer is kind of an experienced guy who can line up a bit of everywhere, but Johnston, there's still a lot to learn about him. I think McConkey, he's set, right? But he needs a couple more guys that we can really trust, and we need them to open up the offense a little bit. We'll see if they re-sign Dobbins. So I have good expectations for Herbert, but I don't know if he'll bump up too much more, where I think Mahomes, if Xavier Worthy makes the leap, if you have Rashee Rice and Travis Kelce says, I'm going to play for one more season, then you're looking at a lot of weapons here for Patrick Mahomes that he hasn't had in quite some time. And then I'm going to go there because the Chiefs are still a higher volume passing offense than the Chargers in general, what they want to do with Jim Harbaugh. So I'd say I feel a little bit better about both these guys climbing, but I think Mahomes is the guy that I would look at. Could have top 12 value next year.
Yeah, focusing on Mahomes here for a second. I think the key for him is that they need to start getting coaches taken away on defense. Like they somehow keep winning Super Bowl after Super Bowl after Super Bowl, and no one is even interviewing Steve Spagnuolo for a head coach. I know he failed the first time, but come on, like they're not getting coaches taken away. They're not getting losing players, right? They need their defense to be a little bit worse because the Chiefs defense has been so good these last 2 years. They haven't really need Mahomes to put up huge numbers. He can, like we saw him having to do it against the Bills. Like when he has to be this great quarterback and put up numbers and put up big points, he can do it. It's just he's not asked to do it because he doesn't need to. And their whole goal is to win Super Bowls, right? Just win games in the regular season. Doesn't matter how ugly they look. And our goal isn't about regular season wins, it's about Super Bowls. So that's what's been hurting him. I will say the second half of the year, though, just like Herbert, he started to have big games. It was a long time from when Mahomes was like even a top 12 fantasy quarterback from the 2023 season all the way through the middle half of 2024. But then once it hit the second half, he had some big weeks in there, quarterback 5, quarterback 2, quarterback 6, quarterback 7. Now he still had some bad weeks too with 17-20, 17-16, but at least we saw some big performances from him. I agree with you. If Xavier Worthy can make his breakout and, Rashee Rice isn't suspended, he's out there. I don't actually know if Travis Kelce matters all too much now. I think it's kind of nice that we got to see him a year where Kelce was, didn't put up crazy production. Maybe we're worried about his passing touchdowns if Kelce does retire, but I do think Mahomes can take a big step forward as long as his defense isn't top 5 again.
Yeah, the other thing is this class is very strong in tight ends. The Chiefs could be one of those teams. We talked about the Chargers, Broncos. This whole division really could look at tight end upgrades, and more with the Chiefs, it'd be a Kelce successor here. So we talked about those guys constantly, Colston Loveland and Tyler Warren, but there were some guys at the Senior Bowl that really looked good. Harold Fannin, he stood out there. So there are some really good options at tight end for the Chiefs to kind of build on that and add an extra weapon here. I know they like Noah Gray a little bit, but he's never really been opened up to be the guy yet over Kelce. So we'll see what they do. But I think overall, looking at their running game, it was pretty bad this year with Isaiah Pacheco, Kareem Hunt. They might decide to open it up a little bit more in the passing game as well next year. And I think I just trust the Chiefs to pass more next year, even if the Chargers upgrade their weapons. That's not the nature of Greg Roman and Jim Harbaugh to want to do that. I think they did it out of necessity, where I think the Chiefs do it out of desire to put the ball in Mahomes' hands.
I will say, I think I'm going to have Justin Herbert ranked as a top 8 quarterback next year once it's all said and done. I really liked his end of the year. It took some time for them to really let Justin Herbert be Justin Herbert in this new system. It was really boring like we thought it was going to be for the first half of the year, but a lot of big weeks. And to end the season, I mean, a 22-point performance, 25, 28, that's week 16 through 18. They did fall flat on their face in the playoffs, but I do think the second half of the year showed him make that connection with Ladd McConkey. He broke out it was all new weapons for him, and it really was just Ladd McConkey, right? If they get him more weapons, like you said, tight end, another true wide receiver too, because Quentin Johnson could be a good deep threat, but I don't think you want him to be a guy that's getting 8 targets a game. I just don't think that's the way for success here. He's just not that type of tight end or that type of wide receiver. So if they can get him weapons, I think Justin Herbert has a chance to really get high in my rankings if they play the draft right and the free agency right and get him some good weapons. Herbert's so good. He should be scoring a lot of fantasy points, right? And what was really awesome about the second half of the season, we started to see him run more, right? He needs to be more mobile. And we did see that. We saw some 40-yard, 60-yard rushing yard games in there. And I think that's huge for Herbert moving forward. So I think Herbert is a great bounce back candidate after a few down years, and I'm excited to see what he could do next year. We had some other quarterbacks have down years after a good 2023 or 2022 season in Dak Prescott, Kyler Murray, Brock Purdy, all disappointed this year. We're going to discuss their outlook in 2025 and let you know if we think they'll bounce back next year right after a quick break.
This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by PrizePicks, and it's a big time because the big game is almost here. There's no better way to make it even more exciting than with PrizePicks, the best place for daily fantasy. With more than 10 million members and billions in winnings awarded, PrizePicks makes it fun and simple to get into the action. Here's how it works. You just pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, and if you're right, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. PrizePicks even has a free pick for the big game where Patrick Mahomes only needs to throw for 1 yard to win. Pair that with one more correct pick minus his rushing total that you do it right there with Mahomes, and you're cashing out just with those 2 picks. So check it out. We will have our PrizePicks picks of the week later in the week before the Super Bowl. Check out the promo tab to tail any of the Super Bowl Sweet and Millie winners, big game lineups. If you tail a lineup that goes 3 for 3, you can win a split of $1 million in promo funds. Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDNFL for $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's only at PrizePicks. PrizePicks, run your game. All right, Michelle, it's time to continue the show. And now we're going to get into some stranger cases and more complicated cases. We had Mahomes and Herbert as potential bounce-back quarterbacks in the first segment. We feel good about those guys. Now I think it gets a little bit dicey with a lot of moving pieces. let's start with Dak Prescott. And look, you're going to say first, he missed a lot of the season. He was shut down by week 10, but he was not very good before then. When you look at the average scoring, he was QB 22. It was a grind for him. And this is with the Cowboys defense taking a step back. Simply, he didn't have the weapons. I didn't like the play calling here. It was very questionable. Now, Mike McCarthy's gone, and they still have Brian Schottenheimer. So I don't know what to do with Dak Prescott. I just know he's not going to be anywhere high close to Mahomes or Herbert.
Yeah, this is the thing with Dak. It was like we saw him have a huge second half of the year in 2023, be quarterback 4 in points per game last season, or 2 seasons ago, I should say, in 2023. In 2022, he's quarterback 14 in points per game, 2021, quarterback 8. Like, he's had good years, he's had down years. It was a while, like, even before the injury. I mean, he wasn't doing anything. He had one big week in week 3, surprisingly, against the Ravens defense. But that was when the Ravens defense was struggling in the secondary greatly. But even Caleb Williams, Derek Carr, and Russell Wilson average more points per game than Dak Prescott this year. Now, it seems like Dak should be getting old. He will only be 32 years old this season. Like, that's not an age we have to worry about, especially because it's not like his mobility that you're thriving on. But I just don't know if he has the weapons to get you the 40 touchdowns you're going to need for him to be like this huge, great fantasy asset. So when we're talking about bounce back guys, I don't actually see it from Dak. Now, do I think he's going to be quarterback 22? No. So technically he's going to bounce back, right? I'm going to have him around the 12 to 14 range. But with just CeeDee Lamb, Jake Ferguson, who we're going to talk about later, not a lot else. And then Brian Schottenheimer is his coach. Not very inspiring. So I think I'm going to let someone else grab him in drafts this year.
Yeah, and above all there, they might need to draft another weapon here. I mean, look at Jalen Tolbert, Brandon Cooks. These guys have not been very consistent to playoff CeeDee Lamb. Jake Ferguson, we'll talk about him a little bit later, had a down season at tight end when he was able to play on the field. He had some health issues as well. So now you're looking at where are the weapons, and now you're looking at the Cowboys maybe being a run-heavier offense all of a sudden, right? Going to find a running back, whether it's Ashton Genty in the first round or investing. There's not a lot out there. They could take a shot on Genty and then bring in Nick Chubb or some weird combination like that for this backfield. I hope they're a little bit more productive on the ground because we want to see a viable running back in this situation. Rico Dowdle is a free agent, so I would expect with Schottenheimer they'll be more committed to running the ball and trying to take pressure off that defense. And then you got to find the weapons. They might be fine with just a deep threat, occasionally playing off CeeDee Lamb, and maybe not investing too much at wide receiver overall in the offseason. So there are a lot of things strikes against here, what Dak Prescott can do in 2025. The Eagles' defense is tough. I bet the Commanders will get better. The Giants had a pretty good pass rush. So even in the division, it's pretty tough here. So look, the arrow's probably going to be kind of pointing down for the Cowboys offense, especially the passing game, where the arrow might point up here depending on who their running back is.
Yeah. And also, like, I think a big part of his success in 2023 was the defense being good, which is weird, but they were getting so many turnovers. Like, the Cowboys just had so many offensive possessions because they were the Cowboys defense was so good at turnovers. So it's going to be hard to see Dak ever getting back to that quarterback 4 status unless, like, they really build up around him and give him like these insane weapons. Now, Kyler Murray was a guy I was banging the table for this year. One of my misses, right? He did had some good weeks in there, but a lot of bad weeks as well. He was quarterback 12 in points per game this season, quarterback 10 in 2023. That was coming off the ACL. Quarterback 7 in 2022 when he tore his ACL. Quarterback 4 in 2021. Quarterback 5 in 2020. So we've seen him be a really good fantasy quarterback. Now, it was way too inconsistent this year. He wasn't running as much. I mean, he still got a decent amount of yards. He had 572 rushing yards on the ground, but only 21 passing touchdowns. Just didn't fully, like, he didn't perform like we wanted him to. My biggest issue with expecting a bounce back is they're not changing coordinators. It's still Drew Pensing. And I don't, like, the offense did not look good. It did not look easy. Nothing looked easy for Kyler Murray in this passing game. So I don't know what's going to change if they're not changing quarterback, or if they're not changing offensive play caller.
Yeah, there's no way Kyler Murray should be contained as a runner. Look, 500 yards rushing is great for a decent athlete at quarterback, the plus guy. I mean, Josh Allen clears that, and he's a better athlete, much better than the average athlete. So when you look at this, Kyler Murray should be getting what Jane Daniels gets, what Lamar Jackson gets. He should be at 800 to 900 rushing yards. And that's a big difference, right? So right there, you're talking about 30 fantasy points. When you look at the running and the cheat code, he's not giving the cheat code. I mean, that's not good when you're not supporting it with passing. And again, the passing was questionable, right? And I mean, Trey McBride needed forever to score a touchdown. Marvin Harrison had a few big games. I mean, he should be better, but they need another receiver. That's another priority here, to have that third option behind Harrison McBride. It wasn't enough, apparently, to have both these guys playing off each other as young stars. So, yeah, there's something off with this offense. I think Petzing would be one guy to watch for a midseason dismissal here. I mean, we had here, so I don't know what you're going to get from Kyler. Again, he just seems reluctant to run. I don't know if it's the ACL. I don't know if it's him wanting to prove himself more as a passer, just like throw some hero balls or just be determined, hey, I don't want to be known as a running quarterback. But it's a big asset. And when it's out the window and you're not rushing as times and you're not scoring on the ground, it's a problem, right? And if James Conner was their most reliable offensive asset, you're not going to get a lot, because this team wasn't that great, right? I mean, they were not dominating teams defensively necessarily, so you expected a lot more out of him. So I don't know. Connor Murray might be just a guy I don't want to banish. We had that episode a couple of days ago, but I think I would take him off my board for now. I need to see a lot of things change to feel good about drafting him.
I think I'd be way more open to giving him a chance and bounce back big time if they change the offense coordinator. I just don't get what they're doing. Like Marvin Harrison Jr., you spent how early of a pick on him? 4th overall, right? And he struggled to get, like, you need a new play caller to help him. Trey McBride should be getting touchdowns. Like, if you're not going to put it on Kyler Murray, right, because you're paying him all this money and you want to keep him as a franchise quarterback, then you got to change the play calling and the scheme. And they're not doing it. So I don't know what the Cardinals are doing. That's hard to call for a bounce back this year. Maybe the year after, right? Maybe they'll get this good new play caller, young play caller, and we could be excited again about Kyler Murray in this offense. Now, Brock Purdy's the last quarterback we're going to talk about here. He's still 25. He's not going to turn 26 till the end of December. It was a disappointing year for him after a really good 2023 season. It actually wasn't all that different, though. He scored 18.5 points per game in 2023. This year, he scored 17.8. So it was a little bit different. It was just more down games, I guess, like really disappointing games, but he still had a lot of good games in there too. Averaged more fantasy points per game than Mahomes, but I guess a lot of guys did. I will say, when looking at the drop off, I was actually surprised it wasn't as big as I thought it was, because he was playing without Brandon Ayuk, without Christian McCaffrey, without Trent Williams for a big chunk of time. He was hurt himself for a large part of this season with an injury to his throwing arm. So many issues on this team, and the fall off wasn't all that bad. He still had a ton of good games in there. And when you look at the games he did struggle, you can kind of give reasons for it, right? Weeks 1 and 2, he played the Jets and the Vikings, 2 of the best defenses. I guess the Jets still had solid then. So yeah. And then the other games that he struggled later in the season, it was in the snow, it was in downpouring rain, right? And then most of the other games were really solid or really good in the 24, 26, 24, 22, like 30 points. So I think Brock Purdy is going to be a great value this year, and I'm definitely calling for a bounce back.
Yeah, I mean, I look at Brock Purdy. Yeah, you mentioned all the variables. I mean, Brandon Ayuk alone could have just contributed to the slip, right? I mean, he had great chemistry with Brandon Ayuk. Deebo Samuel was just kind of, I mean, he did make it up as much as he could with Juwan Jennings, but Juwan Jennings is better to complement a guy like Ayuk. And now we'll see Ricky Purcell. We think he could break out here. So they move on from Samuel, and you have Kittle, Purcell, Ayuk, and Jennings. That's a good array of weapons. And let's hope McCaffrey stays a little bit healthy so he can pad those stats a little bit with those receiving yards and a few cheapy receiving touchdowns, right? So I think Brock Purdy could be a really good value this year, because I think there is a perception, right, that he was terrible last year or he should be traded. The 49ers don't have their guy. But in fantasy, he was right at the borderline of QB 12. So that would have put him where I think I would have drafted him, like 10 to 12, somewhere there. Solid, not spectacular. We knew there could be a little regression because he was so good the previous year in throwing downfield. He's still one of the best downfield passers in the NFL. And when you lose Ayuk, who's one of the best downfield receivers in the NFL, those numbers are going to be affected. So, yeah, I would feel great about Purdy. Like Prescott and Murray make me on edge a little bit, but I could see jumping up right up there with Mahomes and Herbert. into the top 12. Well, he already was there, but more into the top 10. I think you look at Brock Purdy.
Yeah, and what was really great is he was scrambling a lot more. I mean, the games in the middle of the season with 41 rushing yards, 56, 40, 33, and then he hurt his shoulder and he stopped rushing, which is fair. So I do think he added that to his game, and that will be huge for fantasy as well. But Brock Purdy is going to be on the value list this year for sure. People just, they just have down opinions on him because he was the last guy drafted and no one wants to believe in him and all that good stuff. But he's a really good fantasy asset in many weeks, and he's going to be a good value again this year. I'm calling for the bounce back. We are going to get into our tight end candidates for bounce back. We had Sam LaPorta really disappoint us in year 2. T.J. Hockenson coming off the ACL really down half of the season that he played. And then Jake Ferguson just completely busted out this year. We're going to talk about them and let you know if we think they'll bounce back in 2025 after we take a quick break. This episode of Locked On Fantasy Football is brought to you by the Gametime app. Buying tickets to your favorite events shouldn't be stressful. Gametime is the fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer deals on last-minute tickets and their best price guarantee, you can stop stressing over the tickets and start getting hyped for the fun you'll have. It's the fastest-growing ticketing app in the country for a reason, and I use it anytime I'm buying football tickets because guess what? You never know what your view is going to be in those seats. Sometimes you think, oh, I want to sit closer to the field. No, you don't, because you can't see anything, right? But what's cool about the Gametime app is you get a panorama view of your seat before you buy. So you know exactly the view you're going to see of the field before you buy and what to expect when you arrive. So that's awesome. It's super easy to use and very fast. So that's great for anyone who's impatient like me. 2 taps and you're set. And they have the best ticket coverage in the business in case anything goes wrong. You get to take the worries and the guessing work out of buying tickets with Gametime. Just download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. Again, that's code LOCKDOWNNFL, LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. I think the biggest guy we need to discuss, whether he will bounce back or not, is Sam LaPorta, right? Second season last year, tight end 9 in points per game. But he was the tight end 1 in points per game as a rookie. So that felt really, really bad because he was getting drafted very early. And he dropped off a good 2.5 points per game in half PPR from his rookie season to his second year. Now, the second half of the year was much better. He had some big weeks. He had tight end 3, tight end 2, tight end 5, tight end 5, with some bad weeks thrown in there too. But it was nice to see that he at least was coming back in the second half of the season. Do you expect him to bounce back where he can be the tight end 1 in any given year? Let's say even next year.
Yeah, I think a lot of it depends on his touchdown making, right? That was a big reason was rookie year was so special right up there with Travis Kelce. He was still producing at a high level in 2023. I mean, he had the drop off. I mean, Kelce had a more significant drop off, but you look at LaPorta, I think you got hyped, and for good reason, right? He was a breakout guy, but what we also saw was Jameson Williams made an impact, where there was now a second wide receiver, a guy that could stretch the field here, so they could throw deep, playing off Amon-Ra St. Brown. And then in the end, he got some more favorable looks, LaPorta, because St. Brown saw the tough coverage. They were forcing them to beat them more, Williams and LaPorta. LaPorta was coming on with those touchdowns as well in the second half of the season. So I think you just have to maybe split the difference. I think he'll probably finish tight end 3-4, somewhere there. I think you can't expect the touchdown spike that you had from him as a rookie. They just have a lot of guys there. And they also have Jahmyr Gibbs, who tends to be automatic in the red zone. Dave Montgomery, you'll see, again, in this new offense, what goes forth. And again, you have this kind of Broncos spin on the offense. They didn't really have a tight end there as much. I think they would have thrown to the tight end more in Denver if they had somebody that wasn't Greg Dulcich or Adam Troutman, right? I mean, they would have considered that position a lot more. But I think LaPorta will be fine. I think his fluctuation is going to be more in the top 6, I mean, more realistically. And just because I don't see people like Jonnu Smith and some other people that were up there, right? But it's going to come down to touchdowns. But I think the fair range of touchdowns for him are 6 to 10, I should say. So you think somewhere the average is 8. If he gets 8 to 10, he's going to have a slightly better year, but he's still an integral part offensively, even with a coordinator change.
Yeah, I mean, he still got 7 last year, and most of them did come in the second
Yeah.
half of the year. I'll say, like, across the board, his catch percentage was even better than his rookie year. His yards per reception was at 12.1 in 2024. It was only at 10.3 as a rookie.
Mm-hmm.
Everything across the board was like pretty much the same, besides his targets were down, and that was it. And we saw his targets increase greatly in the second half of the year. It went back up to 7.1 targets per game over the last 8 games of the season. That was weeks 10 through 18. That's exactly what he averaged as a rookie, with 7.1 targets per game. And guess what? In those games, he averaged 11 and a half fantasy points per game. And that's exactly what he averaged as a rookie. So I think if we're calling for a bounce back, it's really easy to see Sam LaPorta bouncing back next year. And I do think people are going to be a little bit lower on him than obviously we were last year. So he could also be a very good value. And I do expect a bounce back. Now, TJ Hockenson, let's discuss him, because somehow this dude is only 27 years old. He has been in the league, I swear to God, my whole life. Like, I don't know how he's only 27 years old. He will be 28 in July, but there's still plenty of time for him to have a great, like, a 3 more good seasons at least. Now, coming off the ACL tear, he was only tight on 18 in points per game. He didn't score a touchdown. That was key there, right? No touchdowns this year with the Vikings. But prior to tearing his ACL in 2023, he was a tight end 3 in points per game. In 2022, he's the tight end 4. Now he's going to have a new quarterback, likely again, if Sam Darnold leaves, and probably JJ McCarthy, right? What are your feelings on him? He's never been a big touchdown guy anyways, but obviously he can't be scoring 0 touchdowns.
Yeah, it's a tough case because I think maybe that injury affected him. He wasn't up to speed as earlier as we would have preferred, so he could get the flow a little bit of this offense, especially with the new quarterback, Sam Darnold. He had Kirk Cousins, he was used to him, but now he's going to have to readjust to yet another quarterback. And with his injury last year, he probably didn't get a lot of time in practice sessions with JJ McCarthy. So that's also a concern, right? That's going to have to work, that chemistry. So watch out for reports there. See how they're coming along. It is essentially a rookie quarterback. I know McCarthy's in year 2, but his whole year was wiped out. So essentially, rookie quarterback tends to lean a little bit more on tight ends. And when you look at that, I think that's going to help him. And as well as Jordan Addison breaking out. I think he's somebody you have to pay attention to in coverage. The double teams on Justin Jefferson. He was totally healthy. I don't think he got on the same page with Darnold totally. So I think he's a very strong bounce back candidate. I'm not going to put him too high here in terms of where you draft him, but I think that's going to make him a good value, right? You can probably get him after LaPorta, and you just have to temper expectations. You're not going to get a lot of touchdowns from him. I think you have to have receptions and yards and targets, and based on the right matchups, playing off Addison and Jefferson. So again, he will come through. I just think he's more of a back half tight end 1 in the top 12 versus in the top 6.
Yeah, and like I said, he still has so much time to come back. And coming back the first year off the ACL, it normally can be a down year, and then that year afterwards, it's that big year. So I like TJ Hockenson to bounce back. I'm shocked by his age, but he definitely is a good bounce back candidate. Now, Jake Ferguson was a huge disappointment last year, tight end 30 in points per game. All right. He was a tight end 9 in points per game in 2023 with only 5 receiving touchdowns, right? That was in 2023. So we thought, listen, he got the targets, he got the receptions, he got the receiving yards, the 5 receiving touchdowns. If that just goes to 8, right? He was going to be a really, really good value in drafts. Now, that didn't happen. He actually scored 0 receiving touchdowns. He did miss some games with injury. He was dealing with injuries throughout the year as well, even when he was playing. He had to play with Cooper Rush for the second half of the season, and Cooper Rush did not look towards him whatsoever. He had 3 good games with Dak Prescott. Besides that, it wasn't really there. I think he can be a top 10 tight end again. I don't think he has anything higher than that for a ceiling, but I am also a little scared about Luke Schoonmaker, right? When he came in for Jake Ferguson, he showed he could play. And I don't think that the talent is that different between Ferguson and Schoonmaker. Ferguson's on his last year of his rookie contract. Maybe they want to get Schoonmaker, more involved.
Yeah, and Dak Prescott seemed to have a unique chemistry with Jake Ferguson, and you had Dak Prescott for much of the second half of the season here, so that threw things off as well. You had the injury to Ferguson and Schoonmaker, as you mentioned. It seems like they're just plug and play guys, right? I mean, we went from Dalton Schultz to Ferguson to Schoonmaker, and you basically have the same kind of short area type tight end who is not going to do a lot of field stretching for you, but he's going to get down the seam, make in some situations in the red zone and third down, right? These are the type of tight ends the Cowboys have. They're not the most exciting. So if they're not getting the volume and they're not getting the touchdowns, they're going to be a disappointment. We saw that with Ferguson. So again, he's not a guy I'm going to go target. There's just too much out there. You look at now Bowers in the mix as a top guy. I think you can look at those two rookies I keep talking about because I think they'll be special, Loveland and Warren. Those are two guys I think can get on the field. The acceleration learning curve for these rookie tight ends is getting shorter where they can produce. So, again, there's a lot more exciting option, I'll say that, with upside. But this plugging in Jake Ferguson at the end of your draft, not going there.
Yeah, hopefully people are off of him and he goes undrafted and you can kind of use him as a streamer. I think he could be a good streamer option in good matchups, but not really a guy I'm going to look to draft this year. That is it for today's episode. I want to thank you all for making Locked On Fantasy Football your first listen every day. We'll be back tomorrow talking about wide receiver and running back bounce back candidates. We will talk to you then. Bye, y'all.